So he drives in and sees a brand new Range Rover at the King Roadhouse and just knows it's still safe to go in. Hey guys, this is Jules with True Crime Reactions. I have a couple of more things that I would like to discuss when it comes to the details that we received in the probable cause affidavit for the arrest of Bryan Kohberger, who at this point in time is the one and only suspect in the quadruple homicide that happened in Idaho, where Ethan and Xana, Kaylee and Maddie lost their lives on November the 13th. So like I mentioned in my previous videos, he, as we know from the PCA, was by cell phone tower in the area of the King Roadhouse at least a dozen times, 11 of those being in the evening in the dark hours prior to the incident on November 13th. And there's also a record of him being pulled over by a police officer on August 21st for a seatbelt violation, and I believe he was just barely a mile and a half away from the King Road home at the time that he was pulled over. He was physically driving around in the neighborhood to get eyes on the house and probably see the comings and goings of how the nightlife was. Now, we only have the August 21st date of him being in that area, but we don't have any other dates to compare to anything else. So anyone coming out with information about, oh, he was over there on this date and then that's whenever Kaylee and Maddie were doing this, or Xana and Ethan were doing this, until law enforcement gives us some information, please don't fall for any of that, guys. So if he had only been driving around and physically seeing the area, how would he have known that that brand new Range Rover parked outside of the King house wasn't someone he wasn't expecting? I mean, maybe it wouldn't have mattered to him either way, but still, I'm curious in my own brain, what was his thought whenever he pulled up and saw a big brand new SUV that he didn't recognize? Because remember, like I mentioned in my last video, just like Kylie Rodney was not supposed to be at the Prosser party, Kaylee wasn't even supposed to be there that night. She only went back to go show her best friend for all of eternity her brand new SUV for the very first time. That's it. That's the only reason she was there. So is there a possibility that he maybe didn't even know that Kaylee was even gonna be there? Was he stalking them more than just driving around the house? We went down several different paths, and I've mentioned before, this could literally be someone who has no connection to these people. And whenever I had thought about that process, I was wondering about the stalking thing and how he would have known that that was the night to attack. And knowing that Kaylee was going to be leaving, if Kaylee would have been like the main person that this psychopath wanted to go after, or she was just part of his original plan because she was a resident of the house, then was her being there last minute and going back the reason why it happened that way? Because that could have been his last chance for his plan to play out the way he wanted to, because those were the ones that were in the plan. That's just, it's been something I've thought about, because she wasn't supposed to be there. So it was either literal coincidence or someone was stalking them deep enough to know that she happened to go back last minute like that and take the opportunity.
So Shannon Gray, who's the family attorney for victim Kaylee Gonsalves, he says that no one knew Kohberger before the murders. Kohberger was in the area of the victim's home at least a dozen times before the attack.
So then that leads me to the DoorDash thing. Him leaving his apartment and getting to King Road, from what we saw when he went back to the crime scene 5 hours later around 9 a.m., that he got there and was pinging on towers by 9:12, pinged again at 9:21, and then pinged back at his place of residence at 9:32. So he took a whole round trip from his place to King Road, hung around for about 10 minutes, all in about half an hour. But he left his residence around 2:40-ish and didn't get to the King Road area until almost 3:30. That's a whole lot longer than a 10-ish minute drive. I'm almost wondering this. we know that he had applied for Pullman PD at some point here recently, right? And that his intent with that application was to help, basically from what I'm comprehending, in his wording of rural areas, be able to collect cloud data. Like, he was basically trying to tell them that he wanted to teach Hobunk country folks how to work the interwebs. It's basically how I got that. And from what I'm understanding about how he always had to be Mr. Smartest one in the room, I feel like I'm interpreting that correctly, all right? But that tells me, like I've mentioned, that he's well versed in the way that all this digital stuff works. So who's to say that he didn't hack into some system somewhere and he could see that it was Kaylee that was there, and he can see that it was Xana that ordered DoorDash. And maybe the reason why it took him so much longer, from what we understand, from him coming from his home to King Road, is because maybe he somehow got a notification that a DoorDash had just been ordered, and that now he had to drive back and forth around the neighborhood and wait for this DoorDash person to leave, because he wasn't going to risk the DoorDash person still being in the area to even see his vehicle. Now, granted, he didn't really, leave the neighborhood at all. He basically just kind of went up and down for a lot of no reason. So I'm not really quite sure about on that. But it's so strange to me that there is a DoorDash delivery at 4 o'clock, and then his vehicle is seen coming back into the neighborhood at 4:04. The timing is just too perfect. It's just too perfect. Now, I know a few people have talked about how he was the DoorDash driver. So correct me if I'm wrong, as always, but didn't we hear that whoever the DoorDash driver actually was, that they were already spoken to? And it apparently just seemed like a normal DoorDash delivery. Now, the photo of food that we see going around when it comes to this DoorDash order is a Jack-in-the-Box bag with a white sticker on it that has Xana's name on it. And in the photo, the food is sitting on the kitchen counter. Now, the interesting thing about the Jack-in-the-Box that this DoorDash order apparently came from is that the nearest Jack-in-the-Box is in Pullman, not far from Bryan Kohberger's apartment. So that is a bit strange. But he was seen in the neighborhood already, or at least the Hyundai Elantra was seen in the neighborhood already around 3:30. And all we know at this point is that the DoorDash food was actually delivered around 4 a.m. Sometimes it can take over an hour to get your food, but this place was only about a 10-minute drive. She could have actually made the order after the Elantra was already seen in the neighborhood around 3:30 and still gotten food around 4, especially since it was 4 o'clock in the morning, which it's strange that DoorDash was even allowing deliveries that late at night. I actually didn't think that was a thing. I've seen people get food delivered around 1 out here before, but not 4. But every area is different. It could totally be normal. I don't know. Some people are theorizing that he could have possibly ordered the DoorDash, and that's why the food was just left on the counter, because maybe they didn't know where it came from. But that would insinuate a lot of things, guys. This guy seems to be capable of a lot of really intense things, allegedly. And he's no dummy either. That's something that we very much need to keep in mind here. But that would insinuate that not only is he insane, even more than just taking people's lives, to fake a DoorDash order, pay for it himself some way, and have it sent there, but that would mean that he wanted the house disturbed. That he wanted somebody to go up and ring a doorbell and drop food off. Now, granted, we don't know if someone rang a doorbell, but I know anywhere I've ever gotten food delivered, even though we have these apps that give you notifications and stuff, that bell still gets rang 9 out of 10 times. So does that insinuate he wanted the house to be awake? That he wasn't trying to go in and get anyone in their sleep? Because that's even more intense. And with it being Xana's name, is that on purpose because she was the intended target? Or was it just mind games because he knew all their names? Or was it really just Xana ordering food at 4 a.m. and the timing is just hella crazy? Because when I first heard about the DoorDash order and then learned about all the ways that he drove around in the neighborhood, it just made me wonder, like, we know that his phone was turned off, but we don't know if he had a secondary device. He could have. So I was kind of curious is if somehow or another he was notified that Xana actually made a DoorDash order. And because he was already on his way, he decided just to drive around in the neighborhood until he saw a DoorDash delivery person get out of their vehicle and physically walk up and place food to the door and then leave, because then he would know then it was clear to go. But then he would have still known that at least Xana was awake. Now we know Ethan was spending the night with her, and I guess they could tell by the amount of food ordered if it was for 1 or 2 people to let us know if that meant that Ethan was actually awake or not. Because I know in Dylan's account of the male voice that she heard, she didn't recognize it. And she'd been living in the house for a little bit at that point. And Xana and Ethan had been together the entire time that Dylan was living in the house. And I'm sure that they talked frequently. She would recognize if it was his voice. Everything else, she seemed to recognize where it was coming from. But those are just things that I was curious about. How did he happen to avoid not going into the house when he got into the neighborhood at 3:30 and avoiding a DoorDash delivery person at 4 o'clock? And how did he see KAYLEE'S brand new SUV that she drove there for the very first time to show off to her best friend, randomly sitting at the King Road house that he had never seen before, and still go through with his plan? Because that would technically be 2 things that he would not have accounted for. And he was okay with it, like he already knew. It's just strange.
This is State of Idaho versus Bryan Kohlberger.
We are going to ask the court to set preliminary hearing out into June. Mr. Kohlberger understands his right to a timely preliminary hearing, and he's willing to waive the timeliness to allow us time to obtain discovery in this case and be prepared.
The state has no objection to that, Your Honor.
If you waive your right to a speedy preliminary hearing, it does not mean that you're giving up your right to have a preliminary hearing. It simply means that you would not be able to come back and challenge that the state did not present probable cause within 14 days. Do you understand?
Yes.
Have you had enough time to speak with Ms. Taylor about your decision to waive your right to a speedy preliminary hearing?
Yes.
Do you need any additional time to do so?
No.
Are you waiving your right to a speedy preliminary hearing and agreeing that that hearing can be held outside the 14-day period?
Yes.
And Ms. Taylor, do you concur with his waiver?
I do, Your Honor. Thank you.
We will go ahead and set the matter for a preliminary hearing beginning Monday, June 26th at 9 o'clock a.m. And I will go ahead and reserve the week, so June 26th to June 30th. Mr. Kohlberger, then you will be remanded into custody on your same no bail.
But let me know what you guys think. See y'all.